In this episode of Quakers Today, we ask, who is a historical figure you admire, but whose words or actions trouble you?
We consider the lives of two famous Quakers, George Fox and Richard Nixon. And Miche tells us about the new book, Quakers in Politics. I'm Peterson Toscano.
And I'm Miche McCall. This is Season 3, Episode 4 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation.
This season of Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee. The June-July issue of Friends Journal includes articles about Quaker founder George Fox and what Quakers Today have to say about Fox on his 400th birthday.
For the issue, Johanna and Naveed co-wrote the article, George Fox Was a Racist.
I can see how people would be surprised when they read the title of our article, but I think it's important to recognize our conflicted history rather than turn away from it.
Johanna and Naveed convincingly outline that George Fox was pro-slavery.
While in Barbados in 1671, George Fox had cause to write a letter to the authorities, which has been titled, For the Governor and His Council and Assembly. In this letter, Fox assured the governor that Quakers had no interest in disrupting the order of things. He wrote, Another slander and lie they have cast upon us is, namely, that we should teach Black people to rebel. He said that this was a thing we do utterly abhor and detest in and from our hearts. He further defended, The Lord knows it, who is the searcher of all hearts and knows all things, and so can witness and testify for us, that this is a most egregious and abominable untruth. In some ways, Fox could not have gone further to side himself with the status quo. When Naveed and I were in the Quaker Coalition for Uprooting Racism's cohort meeting on Zoom, and we each shared back what we'd learned, one person said, I did not know that the rot went so deep. The evidence is really clear. He told enslaved people to be obedient, to be meek, to obey their masters, and to become Quaker. Fox told enslaved people not to steal. There seems to be something so screwy, so toppled in on itself about telling someone not to steal when their lives had been stolen from them. And then I kept reading his journals after he left the island of Barbados and he goes to what's now New England. I kept waiting for the part that he would express sadness or remorse or grief at encountering such a system that harms so many people. And that just didn't show up in his journal, ever. I wondered, why is this a story I don't know? Or is it one of those stories I did know in some part of my brain and I blocked out? Like for me, I blocked out the fact that William Penn was an enslaver. It took a little while to integrate that sentence with William Penn. I had some resistance to taking that in. It can be uncomfortable to admit that George Fox was a racist. I think it's important to recognize our conflicted history rather than turn away from it.
I didn't want to believe that George Fox, with all his enlightenment, did not recognize and renounce the horrors of chattel slavery. Read the article to see for yourself the overwhelming evidence of his racism. Quakers have a founder with a major flaw.
Naveed points out harm has occurred and continues today.
We can't repair George Fox's harm, and we can't repair even the harms that Quakers are doing today. But what we can do is reparation, which is different from repairing. It is a balm after the fact. It is a healing.
Someone listening might be thinking, okay, so what? Here's another white man who supported an oppressive, white supremacist colonial system.
When it comes to so what, that is such a good question because, well, I don't really know how people will receive it. Everybody's brain is different. But when I look back at what we wrote, the things that stand out to me as a white person, there's invitations to be more humble, more observant, more perceptive of what is actually going on.
So what now? What is next for us to do?
There isn't an answer to what next, but there is the idea that we have to keep going. If we keep going, and if we keep querying, and if we keep testing and testing and testing the ideas and the notions that we have now and how they were rooted in behaviors of the past, we can decide for ourselves what works and what doesn't work. But it's not a one and done process. We have to just keep going. The idea of continuous revelation is that what is true in the now may not be true in the future. And so we have to continue to examine, to discern, to thresh, to test, to do those things that we're good at as Quakers and keep changing. Just keep going on and keep changing.
Naveed clearly states that we cannot undo the past, and we must not erase it.
It's like that Japanese art form, kintsugi. Kintsugi is the art of repairing something that is broken with a gold powder that is combined with an adhesive. And what it does is it doesn't repair in the way that we traditionally think of repair. For example, if I have a broken phone with a broken screen, I can go and get it repaired and have the screen look like new. But what kintsugi does is it highlights where the break was and creates something new in its place, something equally treasured and equally beautiful. What we need as Quakers is a form of kintsugi where we don't choose to paper the past or repair it or replace it or fix it so that it never happened. We need to acknowledge that it happened and how it happened and where the break occurred, and then put some gold where the break was to bridge the gap.
We can commit to digging into Quaker history and our current practices and structures. We keep going and we keep learning. We can also provide a model for other groups facing troubled leaders and questionable pasts.
A key piece of what the Quaker Coalition for Uprooting Racism is teaching me to do is to notice patterns of oppression or patterns of faithfulness, and then to think, how am I contributing to any of those? Where else do I see those in my life? What do I think are the roots of this pattern? I think it's really striking for a faith that values equality. We have some hard conversations to do about how that looks in our social spheres, in our structure, the voices of which prophets are embraced and which are shunned. I'm less concerned with, well, how do I think about George Fox now? And I'm more concerned with, how can we change the patterns that he began and that I, in some way, continue?
Today, I see a lot of confusion over addressing historical and contemporary figures who fail to meet societal expectations. The default is to cancel them. The idea of canceling someone, commonly known as cancel culture, involves withdrawing support from public figures or organizations after they've done or said something objectionable or offensive. Historians and the public may re-examine the contributions and actions of historical figures.
How do we face history honestly and live with the discomfort of moral incongruity in heroes of old and people today? How do we consider the words and actions of people like William Penn, a historically important Quaker who enslaved people? How do we reevaluate the land where our meeting houses stand, knowing that it may well be on stolen land? What about when we as individuals or groups fall short?
If my life were judged in 400 years, what might people notice for my life? That may be a good question for any person to sit with. Is a disconcerting question and a call to accountability. If someone judged your life in 400 years, what do you think they might notice?
George Fox was racist, and he perpetuated the notion of slavery. Friends reading this article may try to argue a way out of this, but the evidence is clear, and we should embrace it. This is not to make us complicit in perpetuating this travesty. What we are asked to do as Quakers is understand what it means to have leaders in our faith who are deeply flawed. We should examine those behaviors and words of wisdom, the way we do things in our meeting or yearly meeting, that come from the way white folk did things in the past. How can we change them to ways that embrace everyone? How can we change our learned behavior to one that is just for all?
That was Naveed Moeed and Johanna Jackson. They co-authored the article, George Fox Was a Racist. How does that impact Quakers today? You can read their article in the June-July issue of Friends Journal. There, you will also find a variety of reflections on George Fox's history, impact, and legacy. These articles are all available on friendsjournal.org.
Miche and I welcome your thoughts about the article and our conversation with the authors. Email us, podcast@friendsjournal.org, or call our listener voicemail line, 317-Quakers.
As we explore the troubling aspects of George Fox's legacy, shedding light on his racist attitudes despite his foundational role in Quakerism, we want to consider another controversial figure within the Quaker community, Richard Nixon. Wait, Richard Nixon?
Yeah, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, known for his tumultuous presidency, infamous Watergate scandal, and documented racist remarks. Nixon's life and actions have often raised the question, was he truly a Quaker in practice and belief?
After Quaker historian Larry Ingle wrote George Fox's biography, First Among Friends, he studied Richard Nixon and his religion. He published the book Nixon's First Cover-Up, The Religious Life of a Quaker President.
Larry addresses the question, was Richard Nixon a Quaker?
If Nixon had been sitting here and you'd asked Nixon that question, he would say, I'm a Quaker because of the Quaker heritage of my mother, who was Hannah Millhouse. She came to California, Southern California, from Indiana, and they had a long Quaker heritage going back to the 17th century. He never attended after his mother died in 1967. Whether he's a pacifist or not, whether he lives by the testimonies or not, really not important. In his view of things, apparently. At least if you look at his memoir, in which he devotes 3 paragraphs out of 670-page book, 3 paragraphs to his religion. That's all he needs to say. I think that Richard Nixon saw that the popular appeal of a certain variety of Quakers would redound to his political advantage. He did this because those actions in support of the Underground Railroad, in resisting the war, that those positions would redound in 1959 and 1960 to his benefit. They would remind people that Quakers were people who opposed slavery, who not only opposed it, but aided slaves to escape. Quakers have no creed. You can't go anywhere and say Quakers believe this. Therefore, Quakers have developed testimonies. The most basic of these testimonies is a testimony of integrity. because that testimony assumes that we will do and be what we say we are. After looking at Richard Nixon's life and studying as many memoirs, as many recollections as you can find have been produced, the one I found most valuable talked about Richard Nixon as setting up in the White House a us versus them category, that we're different from everybody else. We're doing what's right. Everybody else is doing what's wrong. And that's the basis of the enemies list, a list of enemies of the administration. For me, the testimony of integrity undercuts and destroys any enemies list. Everyone is a human being. Quakers insist that there's something invisible in human beings we call that of God in people. Nixon seldom saw that of God in everyone.
That was Quaker historian and author Larry Engel and an excerpt from the Quaker Speak video entitled, "Was Richard Nixon a Quaker?"
You'll find this Quaker Speak video and the Quaker Speak channel on YouTube, or visit quakerspeak.com. "2024 is a big year. It's a presidential election here in the U.S., and Quakers across the globe are celebrating George Fox's 400th birthday. Fox wasn't a change the political system from the inside kind of person. He's known for walking barefoot in the snow and singing loudly in prison, annoying all of his jailers. Not someone who might put on a suit and run for office. What does a Quaker politician or lobbyist bring to a system many consider compromised and corrupt? How might Quakerism act as an oppositional faith that speaks truth to power instead of wielding it? When does a Quaker in politics need to walk away from the system? Carl Abbott and Marjorie Post Abbott map how Quakers have lobbied kings, served on legislatures, and shaped international policy since our early days. Quakers in Politics addresses the inclination of some friends to disengage from flawed offices and policies. Instead, the writers encourage us to leverage our unique willingness to listen and seek common ground. I'm grateful for the authors for writing this book and for Paul Buckley for reviewing it in Friends Journal. We can't continue having Nixon as the most politically powerful Quaker. The book is Quakers in Politics by Marjorie Post Abbott and Carl Abbott. It's a part of the Quaker Quick series, a set of short books perfect for religious education. You can buy it at quakerbooks.org. You can read Paul Buckley's review in Friends Journal. Each month, Friends Journal includes reviews of several excellent books. Visit friendsjournal.org for more reviews.
And for you listening, thank you for joining us for this episode of Quakers Today. We definitely would like to hear from you.
Many thanks to everyone who is sharing Quakers Today with friends and on social media.
Quakers Today is written and produced by me, Peterson Toscano.
And me, Miche McCall. Music on today's show comes from Epidemic Sound. Season 3 of Quakers Today is sponsored by American Friends Service Committee.
Do you want to challenge unjust systems and promote lasting peace? The American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, works with communities worldwide to drive social change. Their website features meaningful steps you can take to make a difference. Find out how you can become part of AFSC's global community of changemakers. Visit afsc.org. That's afsc.org.
And visit quakerstoday.org to see our show notes and a full transcript of this episode. You can follow Quakers Today on Instagram, X, and TikTok.
Stick around after the closing to hear listeners' responses to the question, who is a historical figure you admire but whose words or actions trouble you?
Thank you, friend. We look forward to spending more time with you soon. Peterson, I mentioned earlier that Quakerism might provide a model for other groups facing troubled leaders and questionable pasts. You came out of an extreme right-wing Christian past. How do you see former leaders in your life and past?
Wow. Yeah, that's true. I was in a deeply anti-gay, anti-abortion, pro-war, intense Christian past. And I fully embraced it until I was in my 30s. Not only do I have to think about the former leaders, but even myself. I mean, I did things back in those days that are so troubling for me. Like, I was totally anti-gay. I tried to destroy the gayness in myself. Sure, I had leaders that assisted me, but it was my own personal mission to kill the gay in me and to oppose any legislation that would give LGBTQ plus people rights. And I look back at that person who seems so different from the person today, and I can't erase that. I also can't erase the fact that at that time, I really believed I was filled with love and that I was doing the right thing. And that is something I don't ever want to forget, because I want to recognize that of God in my opponents, and that they may have ideas that are so wrong, but they think are holy and good and right. It's so easy to judge where someone's coming from by what they're doing. And I don't think that's effective in activism for sure. I've had to learn how to see that of God in myself and in everyone around me without in any way excusing behavior that was harmful.
Wow, yeah. In politics, I often think that people are legislating in bad faith. But thinking about your history, even if someone has a belief that truly harms other people, that it doesn't mean that they think that they hate other people.
Yeah.
And that was really moving to hear you say. Of course, there's going to be people who are doing evil things because they want to be evil. But there is space for reconciliation if people are driven by love.
Yeah.
And that's misplaced sometimes.
Yeah. And you reminded me, too, in what you just said, that when someone's trapped in an oppressive system, they may not see that they're oppressed, and therefore they may end up oppressing other people. It's not just to liberate the oppressed, but also how do we liberate the oppressor?
As Johanna and Naveed were talking, erasing a past doesn't fix it. But engaging and learning from the systems that we're still in and those systems that have been built for centuries is central for a collective liberation.
Well, thanks, Miche, for that question. In a moment, you will hear listeners' voicemails about questionable leaders.
But first, let me share with you next month's question. Here's the question. What does Quakerism have to offer society in 2024? What does Quakerism have to offer society in 2024?
Leave a voicemail with your name and your town. The number to call is 317-Quakers. That's 317-782-5377. 317-Quakers. +1 if calling from outside the USA.
You can also text us, email, or DM us on TikTok, Instagram, or X. Our email is podcast@friendsjournal.org. We have these contact details in our show notes over at quakerstoday.org.
Now we hear answers to the question, who is a historical figure you admire, but whose words or actions trouble you? All right, we have some answers from people who follow us on social media. From my personal Facebook account, Simon Breezeblock wrote, quote, "Here's a big one for me at the moment. Everyone knows Alexander Graham Bell and his contributions to the world in inventing the telephone. He literally changed the world. However, what most people don't know is, despite, or perhaps because of, having a deaf mother and wife, he set back global deaf education and culture by 100 or more years by campaigning for the ban on the use of sign in schools and by the deaf community more generally. Look up the Milan Conference of 1880, end quote. From the Quakers Today TikTok account, Nora writes, FDR, love the New Deal, hate his treatment of Japanese Americans. Nicole simply writes one name, Nixon. And so I'm wondering, Nicole, what do you admire about Nixon? That got me looking into Nixon's history, and I realized I am grateful for what Nixon did for the environment. He established the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, in 1970. This has played a crucial role in regulating pollution and protecting the environment. Nixon also signed the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Endangered Species Act of 1973. While Miche and I were at the Friends General Conference gathering at Haverford College, we shared the question with a few folks, and here is one response.
My name is Ted Heck, and I live in Virginia. I really admire President Barack Obama. However, some of his actions in particular have definitely troubled me while he was president. There were some activities overseas that were problematic and violent, I think did not contribute to peace in the way that I would have hoped. On the other side, he did appoint more LGBTQ people to important positions in the federal government than any person before in the office of president. So I have very conflicted feelings about him.
And from our listener voicemail line, 317 Quakers, we have the following answers.
Hi there, my name is Rick Juliuson. I'm with the Twin Cities Friends meeting. I'm responding to the query about historical figures whom you admire, but whose actions and words also trouble you. And instantly my mind went to Toby Keith, who was a brilliant country music writer and singer. And I have an astounding number of songs of his in my songbook. But his politics I just hated. After the American shock and awe attack on Iraq, he came out with an album called Shock 'Em Y'all. And that's just brilliant marketing, brilliant wordsmithing, and I hate his message. And after 9/11, he came out with the song Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. And again, it's so well written. Hey, Uncle Sam, put your name at the top of his list, and the Statue of Liberty is shaking his fist. And the eagle will fly, man. It's going to be hell when you hear Mother Freedom start ringing her bell. It's just an amazing, rousing war song of our era. It's a great song. And again, I'm so opposed to the message. And so I was wondering, should I just get them out of my songbook altogether? But the songs I have in there are the songs that I do like the messaging and that make me laugh or cry or both. And I decided that I can respect an artist and his artistry without that meaning that I endorse his politics, because he has the right to his politics, and he's an extremely intelligent man. And he died recently, and in his obituary, I could see that he was much more nuanced than I gave him credit for. He actually backed Obama's first campaign. So there were parts of his politics that I didn't agree with, and parts that actually we were eye to eye. So I'm also glad I hadn't written him off. Thank you so much.
Hello, this is Charlie Domenici. I'm a member of Lehigh Valley Friends meeting, and I live in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I very much admire John Woolman, of course, for his opposition to enslavement. But I am troubled by the story of him killing all those baby birds that were abandoned by their mother instead of raising them himself. I just feel a lot of concern that he would look at another species and see that it was his option to just kill members of that species. It felt like he was taking too much power into his own hands. So thank you. Goodbye.